Hey gang, Uncle Josh here, and I want to tell you about Amazon Music Unlimited. This is one of my favorite ways to listen to music on my mobile device. It's a premium music subscription featuring over 70 million songs and thousands of expert program playlists and stations to fit your musical needs. Why is it important? Because right now, go to getamazonmusic.com/UncleJoshTrueScaryStories for your free trial. With Amazon Music Unlimited, you can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, and I'm talking all the stuff that I listen to on Amazon Music Unlimited, from Jimmy Smith and Miles Davis, all the way to Tool and ZZ Top. Man, I've got an eclectic taste of music, and man, you want to listen to Fear, Black Flag? I bet you've never even heard of the band Flipper, but you know what? They've got it on Amazon Music Unlimited. And you can listen to it anywhere. Smartphones, tablets, PC, Macs, Fire TV, and Alexa-enabled devices like Amazon Echo. They're listening to everything you say, folks. You'll never hear or see an ad. And of course, you can download songs or playlists for offline listening and save on your bandwidth. Again, go to getamazonmusic.com/UncleJoshTrueScaryStories for your free trial. And I'll tell you this too. This is the coolest thing. Amazon Music Unlimited gets to know you. It'll personalize recommendations based on your listening habits. So, hey, if you're a fan of the Beatles, they're going to find other bands that you probably would like that sound kind of like the Beatles. And again, they're pulling from a catalog of over 70 million songs. Go find out why I like Amazon Music Unlimited. GetAmazonMusic.com/UncleJoshTrueScaryStories. Whether you're after the perfect playlist for a campfire, if you're looking for podcasts, oh my God, I'm listed there. You can get all of that and figure out the best way to listen to music or podcasts. Anything that you're looking for is at the tip of your fingers. The latest hits from today, the greatest hits from yesterday. They have it all at Amazon Music Unlimited. Go there right now. Get AmazonMusic.com/UncleJoshTrueScaryStories. Sign up today for your free trial. I guarantee you're going to love it. You're not going to be disappointed. Get AmazonMusic.com/UncleJoshTrueScaryStories. And now, without any further ado, hey Campfire Crew, let's get it on. Two Whackos at Camp, submitted by Jazz101. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go camping in an area that we had been camping before. This was before COVID, obviously. We were hoping to get back soon. We always liked going there because it was such a laid-back atmosphere, and there weren't always a ton of people at this campground. There were only about 10 spots for people to pitch tents, one communal bathroom, and limited water. Zero electricity at any of the sites. We got there early on a Friday evening and saw the sign-in cabin was empty. There was a sign on the door with an arrow pointing to a wooden box that just said Honor Box. Normally there was a guy working there to take your money, but for whatever reason, this weekend it looked like they were just asking people to be cool and honest about the $18 site rental per night. We were planning on staying 2 nights, so I threw in $40, and that's when a guy came around the side of the cabin. He was wearing a green shirt and khaki pants, but he didn't look like he really worked at the campsite. I asked him if he wanted to get the money out of the Honor Box, and he said no, but he appreciated that we were doing it and he would take care of things later. There was almost no one else at this secluded campground, so with a wave of his hand, he said, hey, take whatever site you'd like. All of the sites were in a loop with nothing but forest behind them. The bathroom was kind of in the middle of the loop, along with a spigot for water. So as we drove around, we decided to take the campsite at the far end of the loop, the farthest from the cabin, but it was still in sight. Then we set up our stuff. It was a warm summer weekend, and we were just looking forward to relaxing and hanging out. I suppose I should mention that it was my friend Nate, Chris, and myself. We were all in our mid-20s and looking for some time away from our girlfriends. It's funny how when you're in high school, all you wanted was a girlfriend, and then a few years later, all you want to do is get away from them. We unloaded my Jeep with all of our gear from the roof rack, and Nate volunteered to go back to a general store not too far away to load up back with firewood. Chris and I got to work setting up my big tent and getting things ready for a dinner of steak and potatoes and lots of beer. We talked about how it was kind of cool that no one else was out here. I mean, usually when we came, at least 3/4, if not all, of the sites were full with people of varying ages and families. And we didn't care. It meant that if we got a little rowdy or the music got a little too loud, we probably wouldn't have anyone to contend with. And no one would be complaining if no one was there. Nate got back, we got the fire going, and we enjoyed cooking steaks over the fire and having some premium brew. Just enjoying the darkening summer evening. We all had cell phones, but we had agreed to try not to use them, or if we had to keep it to a minimum. We just wanted to enjoy nature and our company. Now that I write that sentence, I laugh at the word company, because company is what we got, and it was not the kind we asked for. Around 9:30, it was completely dark, and only the flames of the fire were lighting up our campsite in our faces. This older guy wandered over to our site and said hello. He looked really disheveled, and immediately I didn't want him around. But Nate was one of those guys who was always super friendly to anyone he met, and offered the guy a beer and some Doritos. The guy was very thankful, sat down, and introduced himself as Sam. He said he was in a campsite on the other side of the loop. To be honest, none of us had been paying attention to see if anyone actually pulled up or set up a camp, as we were busy taking on care of the things that we were taking care of. As the evening wore on and the beers kept flowing, Sam started to become really belligerent. He wasn't going off on any of us, but his words were a little alarming as they took on a lot of racial tones, and not in a good way. Lots of N-word this and J-word that and so on. The first one of his jokes was kind of funny, but then things got really serious with the way he was talking, and it was making me very uncomfortable. After a while, I decided to get up and go take a leak, and when I got back, I motioned for Chris to come help me with something, and I told him, man, I really think we need to ask this guy to leave. He's starting to bother me with all this stuff. Now, I'm not perfect, and I've said enough stuff in my time to be sorry for, but this guy was edging on the side of white power and white supremacy stuff. I just didn't want that anywhere near me or in my life. Chris agreed, and he ended up talking to Nate, and Nate also agreed that it was time for this guy to head back to his campsite. We told him that we were going to close things down for the night, and Sam thanked us for the beer, grabbed another one from the cooler, and then wandered away into the dark. We all decided honestly to wrap it up for the night and douse the fire. We put all of our food back into my Jeep and then crawled into the tent. At about 2:30 in the morning, I heard someone walking towards our tent. I had not had as many beers as the other guys. Nate was snoring away, and Chris was out like a light. I just lay there listening to what I knew were human footsteps coming towards the tent. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped, and I saw a flashlight go on and play around our campsite. Then I heard someone jiggling the handles on all four doors of my Jeep, and then the light came right over to our tent. I'd been nudging Chris to wake up, and he finally did. And that's when a green light came through the tent fabric as the flashlight played on the outside of it. I called out, "Hey, what do you want?" There was a gruff laugh, and a voice said,
"Don't fuck with me. Throw your wallets outside the tent, but don't you dare come out. I have a gun pointed right at you. Just do what I say."
I looked in Chris's direction in the dark and whispered, "Dude, what do we do?" The guy heard me and said,
"I suggest you do what I just told you to do, dummy."
We woke Nate up and said, "Look, there's a guy outside with a gun, and he wants our wallets. I think we shouldn't do anything stupid and just give him our stuff." But I also made a motion with my arms to both of their arms to give them the idea that we needed to stall and see how we could resolve the situation. I called out, "Hey, my wallet's actually in my car, so I don't know what you want me to do about that." Chris said, "Dude, I don't even have any money on me, and I don't have any credit cards." Nate said that he would look in his pack for his wallet, and we could tell the guy was getting really impatient. He was on the edge of yelling at us to hurry up. That's when we heard a massive thump and saw the flashlight drop, as well as the green light that had been playing on our tent wall. We heard another voice say, "You guys can come out," and we realized who it was. It was Sam. Yeah, that guy. We immediately unzipped the tent and crawled out, and lying on the ground was the guy in the green shirt and khaki shorts that we had seen earlier. He had been smacked in the head by Sam, who was holding a very thick stick, and I grabbed my phone from my pocket and called the local sheriff. It took them a while to come out, and the guy that had been hit was still kind of groggy lying there on the ground. Sam just stood there drinking more of our beer, and said that he had noticed the flashlight and the green light wandering around the campsites before he decided to retire. But that made him nervous, so he didn't. Eventually, the sheriff showed up, ran the guy's ID, and saw that he had 2 open warrants on him, and he put him in his car. So the story was, this guy, outside of his criminal activity, every once in a while he would pose as a worker at the campsite and break into the honor box. Apparently they'd been having a really good season, and just recently stopped having a lot of attendance. The guy was smart and wouldn't always take everything. He always just took what he thought he needed. His green light? It was not a gun. It was just a laser pointer that looked like a laser sight someone might have on a real gun. The sheriff asked if we were okay and if anything had been taken. We said no, we were just going to ride out the night and take off in the morning. He got all of our information and names and stuff, and when we had gotten there and that kind of thing. Sam looked at us one more time and said goodnight, and then wandered away. I looked at my buddies and said, "Guys, let's pack up and get the hell out of here." I mean, even though Sam had come to our rescue, I didn't trust him either. All of his negative rhetoric and racism, he seemed like he had some pretty serious issues and certainly could have been a loose cannon for all we knew. We quickly packed up and left our unused firewood at the campsite. I wrote a note to leave in the honor box that whoever wanted it could keep it, and I'm sure the sheriff was going to be following up with whoever they needed to as far as the authorities go about that place. By now it was close to 5 in the morning when we left. We all had a beer on the way to a Greasy Spoon not too far from the campsite. We wanted to grab something to eat before the rest of the drive home. I haven't been back there, and I don't plan on going back. There's a lot of other places to camp, and like I said, while I appreciate what that Sam guy did for us, that whole place just gave off a really weird vibe that I will never shake. The Silence, submitted by WB. Back in the 80s, one time I went out on a sort of scouting camping trip for the upcoming hunting season in a place called Huffaker Mountain in Washington State. I wanted to scout out some prime deer spots for my family and friends, but I also wanted a break from work and the rat race. I got all my kit together, got in my trusty Bronco, and made out for the area with light gear fit for a late spring. It was still cold, but I knew I could get by with my tent and a reflector fire, along with my MREs. The drive took about 4 hours, and it was still midday when I got to where I was going to park and then hike in. It's been a long time, but I remember it so well. Gorgeous day with plenty of woodland and meadow noises from the fauna and fowl. I only stopped once on my hike to have a chew of Redman and kept moving to the spot I wanted to scope out. I didn't see anyone else out there that day, probably because it was midweek and the summer hikers and campers weren't out in full force yet. It felt like I was all alone, because I was. I found a place to set up a small camp next to a stream. It was a little rocky area with some flat grassland next to it where I could pitch my tent and safely build a reflector fire on the rocks and sand between me and the water. I tried my hand at some fishing, but got nothing, so I just enjoyed the cold, clean water as I got a fire going and prepared an MRE. I was planning to check the rest of the area the next day, so I wanted to make sure that I got plenty of sleep and was up early. I stoked the fire, had some coffee, and just listened to the wilderness as night fell. And that's when I noticed it. Nothing. Outside of the fire crackle and the stream burbling, there was nothing. No birds, no bats, no animal noises of any kind. Any hunter knows that this is a precarious situation, especially this far out into the wild. It could have been anything, a bear, a lion. There's never simply silence out here unless there's a reason. So I sat and listened to all that nothingness and kept looking around. And that's when I heard it. Heavy thudding footsteps, breaking twigs and leaves, crunching, coming from off to my left. It wasn't the sound of a deer or elk. I mean, hell, most of the time they're silent. It was too heavy to be a lion, and it was too methodical to be a bear. The grass to my left was high enough that I couldn't see over it, so I just sat and listened. And suddenly there was a loud grunt. Some splashing as whatever this thing was wading across the creek, and then it went into the brush on the other side. I sat there frozen for a solid 10 minutes before picking up my rifle and walking towards what I had heard go by. And then I noticed all the woodland sounds came back. Frogs, night birds, everything. I scouted around to see if I could find anything with my flashlight and came across some footprints in the mud right before the water's edge. Big footprints. I didn't measure them, but my foot is a little over 12 inches, and this was a good 6 inches longer and way wider. I looked across the stream, and that's when I heard a faraway howl. I'd never believed in Sasquatch, no matter all the tales I'd heard growing up in the Pacific Northwest. But that night I made a quick decision to clear out and head home in the darkness despite the danger. I was not going to wait for whatever I had heard to come back, Sasquatch or not. It took me a lot longer to get back to my truck, obviously, but I was dead set on sleeping in it rather than being out in the open, even though it was miles from where I'd heard what I'd heard. When I got back home, I asked everyone I knew if they had ever heard anything like that happening, and one friend told me that he had. I'd never heard or saw anything for decades of hunting and fishing and camping. I don't know. Maybe this was my lucky night. Years later, that Bigfoot show came out on TV, and I found out that Lewis County has had a lot of reports of Sasquatch, and I wonder if I had indeed come close to one. I wish I had seen it, if that's what it really was. Something from the Sky, submitted by Andy J. When I graduated from college in 2015, my parents bought me a really high-end telescope as a present. I was into astronomy, but a biology major, and I suppose they are at least related by my interest in the sciences. My best friend Ryan was and is a photographer, also interested in the night sky. We decided to get our girlfriends Renee and Lana and head out to the country for a camping trip, and to check out the moon and planets with no light pollution. I can't stress that enough. If you love stars and planets, get out of any of the cities or suburbs you live in. If you've never looked up without any light pollution, man, it is some of the most beautiful things you will ever see. Renee's family had a bunch of land about an hour and a half outside of the city we lived in upstate New York. There was an old abandoned farmhouse, but the land was kept by the family for hunting and fishing, and the ponds that were dotting the landscape. Ryan and I loaded up my truck and his car for a few days outside. A couple of tents, camp stove, all the food we would need, and coolers full of refreshments. I had also just purchased a solar shower that I wanted to use, and everyone was making fun of me about it. I mean, it is kind of a sidebar, but I will say this. I swear by those things, and I will never go camping in the middle of nowhere without one. They really do work. Anyway, we made the drive in, turned into the dirt road that eventually turned into more of a grassy road. Just 2 tire tracks with grass growing up in the middle. We found a great spot to stop right next to a pond, and immediately Ryan and I jumped out of our vehicles, stripped off our clothes, and jumped into the water. No, not naked, just boxer shorts. The girls were laughing, and we were trying to coax them into the water too, but they weren't going for it yet, not without bathing suits. We got our area staked out, pitched our tents, and I was reading up on my new telescope. I had 2 others, but this one was new, and the attachment that Ryan had brought to take pictures with was something new to me. It was going to be a very clear night, and I was so excited to show my friends Jupiter, Saturn, and all the other neat things that a telescope provides. Yeah, I sound like a nerd, but, well, I guess I'm a nerd. That afternoon, we all decided to enjoy a swim and then had hot dogs and hamburgers for dinner. We're kind of scoping out the area that we were in. The abandoned farmhouse was totally off limits for a good reason. The thing looked like if a strong wind came, it would knock it over, and there was no way we were going anywhere near that death trap. There was a little rise up a hill from the place that we were at, and I thought that would be a perfect place to set up the telescope once we had a campfire going, and night really fell. I had my star charts and knew exactly where to look and how to program the telescope to show us the really cool things that you can see. And that's what we did. We all took a beverage of choice out there, and I started showing the planets and other neat things based on what was out in the sky. Ryan took some really cool shots of the moon, and he was going to break out his laptop later to do the whole Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever it is photographers do with their photos. I was excited to see the pictures. I mean, it wasn't a full moon, and Ryan said that that was optimal because a full moon apparently doesn't show off a lot of the features on the surface. All right, again, I'm rambling, but this is where things kind of go haywire. It was about midnight, and I was thinking about packing up stuff when we noticed a bright flash in the sky. The girls had gone back to the campfire, and Ryan and I looked at each other and thought, oh boy, is there a storm coming? Was that lightning? There was another flash a ways away from our camp, by some woods. The flash was directly over the trees, and I said, Man, that is not lightning. The flash was so bright it literally lit everything up. I couldn't tell you how far away it was, because when you're out in the middle of nowhere, everything looks closer than it really is. If you don't believe me, go for a hike sometime. Look at a distant hill and start walking towards it. What looks like a quarter of a mile away is probably closer to 2 or 3 miles. It's just one of those things when you're out in the wilderness. I grabbed my spotting scope and looked through it towards the trees, but it was so dark I couldn't really see anything. I mean, how could I? Even the light from the moon was not bright enough to show what was going on at the edge of the trees. But that's when a bright light lit up inside the trees, and I could see that something was going on. It looked like a construction site at night before the light finally went off. Ryan asked me if Renee knew if anybody lived over there. I mean, maybe we were just looking at someone's cabin and their outside lights or whatever came on. There was power running down the main road to get to these places, but I was not under the impression that there was power running out to individual cabins. We did find out the next day that that was the case, but there was no cabin where we saw the light coming from. And that's beside the point about what I'm going to tell you next. We packed up all my stuff and went back to the campfire and had a couple more refreshments before deciding to head to our tents. After putting out the fire, we all fell asleep, and the cool night air was coming through one of the windows in my tent that I had left open. The other 2 windows and door were zipped shut. Renee and I snuggled together and then dozed off. But something woke me up around 3 a.m. I could hear rustling outside of our tents. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and looked at my phone and saw that it was indeed around 3 a.m. Figured, maybe it's just coyotes or a deer that are walking around. Just checking out our campsite, having smelled the fire and the food that we had eaten. But I didn't hear any yipping, and I didn't hear any panting. All I could hear was this rustling. That's when I heard Ryan whisper, "Hey, Andy, do you hear that?" I whispered back, "Yeah." And by this time, our little conversation had woken up the girls. I grabbed my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, Renee let out this blood-curdling scream that scared the hell out of me. She was pointing to the window that I had unzipped, and I looked towards it and saw something that most people will never believe I actually saw. There was, for lack of a better term, a creature standing there looking into our tent. It didn't look like the things you see on TV or in the movies. The big-headed alien with big black eyes. This was a white face that looked like it belonged to a child with round eyes. I mean, that's the thing that was burned into my memory, those round eyes. I was about to yell too, when suddenly there was a scrabbling at our tent door as if something was trying to open the zipper. And then something like out of the Blair Witch happened. There were hands or something banging on our tent walls as well as Ryan's tent. It was just like in that movie. And if it hadn't really happened and I had heard this tale from someone else, I would have called bullshit that they had watched that movie too many times. Renee screamed again, and I yelled out, still fixated on the face in our window, and it backed away. The scrabbling at our tent stopped, and everything went quiet. I finally got Renee to stop screaming, and Ryan had already emerged from his tent. I told my girlfriend to stay where she was, and went outside with Ryan despite her pleading for me to stay. We looked around, but there was nothing out there. We were breathing heavily, completely freaked out by what had just happened. I told him what I had seen through the window, and what Renee had also seen. His windows were closed, and he hadn't seen anything. The girls were screaming for us to get back in our tents, but we wanted to have another look around. There were lots of little footprints all around our tents and campsite. They had matted down the wet grass and clearly were walking away from us, and I wanted to follow the tracks, but Ryan said that would be stupid. I argued with him for a few minutes, but then finally saw the logic that walking away from our campsite following some weird creatures was probably a really bad idea. Again, the girls were yelling at us to get back inside, but I told them that Ryan and I were going to stoke up the fire again and stay up all night to make sure that if these things came back, we could protect ourselves, or at least maybe get a picture of them. We got a fire roaring, and I broke out more hot dogs as we were hungry. That's when Ryan and I saw another flash of light from the direction that we had seen it come from earlier. We ran up the little hill, and as we looked over, I had my spotting scope again. There was still nothing to see. Then there was another bright flash in the sky, and as we stood looking in the direction of the flashing lights, I noticed something funny about the night sky. A large portion of it was completely black. No stars at all. There was this large triangular shape in the sky slowly moving towards us. It didn't have any lights on it. It was just this big black shape. We stared at it, and as it went right over top of us, it blacked out the sky for at least 10 seconds before it moved towards the south and away from us. I looked at Ryan and I said, "I cannot believe what I just saw." And he said, "I can't believe what you saw either because I saw it and I don't believe what I saw." We watched this thing drift away and then went back to the campsite. The girls were freaking out that we had not come back, and we coaxed them out of the tents, wrapped them in blankets, and we all sat around the fire and had a snack. I told them that I was going to stay up and watch over things, but everyone was so keyed up after what we had told them and what we had seen, obviously what they had experienced, there was no way we were going back to bed. Ryan took some pictures of the footprints, but really there was not too much to see other than indentations in the grass. It would have looked like anything to anybody who had experienced what we did. I knew that anybody who looked at them would just say it was a deer or coyotes or raccoons or a fox. We talked until dawn about what had happened and tried to rationalize that maybe it was just a bunch of animals. But Renee and I had looked right into the face of this thing, and I know in my heart of hearts that was not an animal. I'm telling you, it looked like a small child. Round head. I couldn't make out a nose or mouth, but those two round eyes, man, they're still there in my head. The next day we decided to head home rather than stay another night. As much as I wanted to stay, the girls were not having it. But before we left, Ryan and I did go over to the forest where we saw the lights. There was nothing there. There was a little clearing a little ways into the trees, but no cabin, and no mark of anything had been made that give any indication that something had landed. I know people listening to this are going to call bullshit and say that our imaginations ran away with us, or we're just making it up totally. But I'm not, and we're not. I reached out to a state organization with my report and had a follow-up, but have not heard anything back. There was a request to send out some people to investigate what we had seen and where we had seen it, but Renee's family was not cool with that. They didn't want strangers wandering around out there. I still use my telescope at least once or twice a week all year round in good weather. I've seen lots of cool things, and I've taken lots of neat pictures as Ryan showed me how to use my camera to capture things. One thing's for sure, I have not and probably will never see anything like what we saw that night again. The good thing is our families believed us. And come to find out, in the late 60s there were reports of strange lights in that area too. I suppose it adds a little credence to our story. But at the end of the day, I don't care if anyone believes me or not. I saw what I saw. I can't say it was aliens, but it was something very, very strange. I don't know how many of them were outside our tents. They were very curious, but I'm glad they left us alone. Backyard Not So Safe, submitted by Samuel N. When I was a kid in the 80s, we loved to camp out all the time. We even loved to camp in our backyard. I grew up in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, on a street that was full of young families and lots of kids. There were a few older people, and they were always really great to us. The trick-or-treating was always amazing, and holiday time was also a lot of fun. There was a lot of camaraderie between the neighbors. Our doors were always open to everyone. There's a comedian named Sebastian Maniscalco who does a funny skit about not answering the door anymore when the doorbell rings. But when I was a kid, everyone knew that they could just knock and come right on in. We were friendly to everyone. When I was about 10 years old, my friend Toby came over to play, and we were just messing around with our G.I. Joe guys and whatever. My mom asked if he wanted to stay for dinner, and we'd been talking to see if he could actually stay overnight. My parents said okay, and he ran to the phone to call his mom and dad to see if it was all right if he slept over at our house. This was in the summer, and we'd been talking all day about setting up my pup tent and camping outside if we could. My family had a fairly big backyard with lots of trees, and my next-door neighbor to the left was a young guy with his wife, and on the other side was an older couple. Throughout the day, though, we noticed a guy on the other side of the fence at the older couple's house we'd never really seen before was kind of hanging out around the fence and paying attention to us. He didn't say anything. He just kept walking up and down and smoking a cigarette. When I look back on things now, I realized that he was probably listening to our conversations as we played with our G.I. Joes and talked about sleeping outside. When Toby's mom said it was okay if he stayed at our house, we got super excited and started going overboard with our planning for camping in the backyard. My dad gave his approval and said he would help us set up my pup tent. After dinner, we got flashlights and were planning on seeing how late we could stay up, even though my parents said that we had to turn our lights off and go to bed at 11. Yeah, right, like that was going to happen. We got the tent set up, and my dad said he was going to have a campfire with marshmallows, and then have my mom and sister come out before we went into our tent. We protested, but that was it. When my dad made a decision, that was the decision, and he was nice enough to help us with the tent and let us stay outside in the first place. So for an hour and a half or so, we watched the sunset, had a campfire with s'mores, and my dad was telling funny stories. We kept asking him to tell scary stories, but he wouldn't do it because my sister was only 6, and he didn't want to get her scared. Toby and I said, we'll just tell each other scary stories before we go to sleep. After the campfire, my dad talked to us and told us to be safe, and if anything happened, the back door would be open and to run in right away. He wasn't being a helicopter dad. He was just letting us know that if a storm came through or if anything else happened, that we should just get inside and wake him up or my mom. We were so excited to be out camping in the backyard, on our own finally. We did start telling each other the scariest stories we knew, and a lot of them were from that book, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. We weren't reading right out of the book. We were just giving our own versions of the scary ones that we thought were the best. It was right around 11 when we heard someone coughing somewhere outside of the tent. It was like how I would now describe someone with a smoker's cough. We unzipped the front door of the tent and poked our heads out and flashed our flashlights around, but we didn't see anything or anybody. We went back to telling each other stories, and then talking about school that was coming up. This was probably mid-August, and we were going back to school real soon. We then heard the coughing again, and once again I looked around outside, but I didn't see anything. Then we heard some footsteps, but it was just my dad coming out to check on us, telling us that we probably should get some sleep, and that he was going to make pancakes in the morning. Basically what he was saying was, knock it off, keep the chatter down, and keep the flashlights off. Toby told me he wanted to tell me one more story that his grandfather had told him, and I don't remember all the details, but it was pretty creepy. It was about a guy falling off a boat and drowning. The creepiest part was, people a week or two later saw the guy walking around town, even though the body had been found, and the guy really was dead. That one freaked me out because it wasn't from a book. It sounded like it was really true. And that's when we heard the cough again, but now it was much closer. I sat up as much as you can sit up in a pup tent, and that's when we heard a voice say,
Wow, that was a scary story.
It was not my dad. It was not a voice that either of us recognized. I unzipped the tent door a little bit and poked my head out, and in the darkness, but still light enough from the moon to see, was that guy we had seen on the other side of the fence earlier in the day. But now he was completely naked, standing about 3 feet from our tent with his arms reaching out over the pole that kept the front end of the tent up. My first instinct was to yell out, "Go away!" But all he did was put his arms down and then started walking around the tent, dragging his thing across the walls. He did that once, then twice, and now we were both yelling at him to go away. That's when we heard the back door of my house slam open. My father yelled, "Hey, you! Get the hell out of here!" We heard some scrambling and the sound of the chain-link fence banging a little bit. And without hesitation, Toby and I ripped the tent door open and ran towards my dad in the back door. My dad grabbed both of us by our collars and practically tossed us into the house, not meaning to hurt us, but just wanting us to get in as fast as we could. He looked at us, got down on one knee, and asked what happened. I told him, and he said, "Okay," and then had us sit at our breakfast bar as he made some hot chocolate and got on our cordless phone. He was calling the police, and not long after, maybe 5 minutes or so, a car pulled up in our driveway, and my dad went outside and gave the 2 police officers what had happened. After a little while, he came back in and said, "Hey, why don't you guys go get your sleeping bags and then sleep on the living room floor if you still want to have a camp out?" He was being really cool, but we could tell something was very wrong. We knew something was wrong. There was a naked guy in front of our tent. My dad locked the doors as we watched out the windows, which we weren't supposed to be doing. The 2 police officers who came over were walking that guy I had seen earlier out to their car, and they put him in the back. One of them came back and talked to my dad on the porch, but we couldn't really make out what they were saying. My dad came in, told us to go to sleep, and that he would still make us pancakes in the morning. We heard him go upstairs and talk to my mom for quite a while, but again, we couldn't hear what was going on. The next morning we did have pancakes, and my dad went next door to talk to the older couple. Apparently, the guy we had seen was the lady's second cousin who was in town for a visit. He'd been arrested in the past for flashing little kids at a park and some other really creepy things involving children. The couple next door had no idea about his past and were so apologetic and sorry that they let him stay with them for a week. We didn't hear any more about what happened to the guy, but I did end up working at my next-door neighbor's hardware store when I was in high school. One day when it was slow and it was just the two of us, we were just restocking shelves, and I asked him about that guy, and for a hard minute he looked at me and then said, "Son, I feel terrible about what happened to you back then. But," he said, "there's not much I can say, but I assure you, that guy will never be back. We need to just let it go." I did, and so did Toby, for the most part. We ended up making a nickname for the guy and told all of our friends what had happened when we got back to school. And all the way through high school and into college, anytime something creepy happened between our friends, we always called it a pudgy man, because the guy was on the heavy side. And it's funny now to think that that was the only name we came up with, because as a father of grown children, now I can think of a lot worse names to come up with. I only hope my kids never run into a pudgy man. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story you'd like to hear narrated on this channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and make sure you hit the notification bell for every time that I upload. Also, find me on your favorite podcasting platforms. I'm all over the place, including Amazon Unlimited, and you can save yourself a little bit of bandwidth by downloading my podcasts. I hope all of you are well, and I'm looking forward to doing more live virtual campfires real soon, so stick around for that. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.